But yeah, the other one, what were we talking about? And The Hitcher.
Oh,
Now
yeah,
that
The
was a
Hitcher.
really good exploitation, and I got to tell you, I watched that movie, and I went back to watch it again, just to watch the first few minutes. And every time I did that, I'd watch it all the way to the end. Once I started watching this film, it just sucked me in, and I had to watch it to the very end each time I watched it. To talk about a movie that flows, well, once you start watching it, even though I know everything that's going to happen already, I just couldn't put it down. Great. Rutger Hauer plays a great villain in there. C. Thomas Howell, that part was written for him as the victim in the story and the hero. But yeah, that's a really good exploitation film. And these are the ones, in my opinion, to study if you want to learn how to make a really great exploitation film.
Great, great. Now, this is the third installment of Screenwriting Tips, and we've talked about previous scripts that you've written, stuff that you've submitted to the big Hollywood studios, and you mentioned Gangs of New York and The Postman took some elements off of scripts that you've submitted to these major studios in the past.
They didn't plagiarize. Let me say that right now.
Elements,
but they didn't take anything, like a scene that I wrote or dialogue that I wrote, but they took some of the ideas and incorporated them into those, And I didn't find out I suspected it, but I didn't find out about this till years later. But I took it more as a meant rather than, what I'm saying, feeling like a victim. You see what I mean? But yeah, they took elements like in The Postman, there was this idea of you have the people who remember the technology before society fell apart. And you have the kids who didn't. And then the older people explaining this to the younger people, that whole generation gap. And they're like, wow, you had cars that you could just drive. You didn't have to get on a horse. You could travel from one side of the country in a couple days just on a car. Wow, that was the idea. And they used that in that. They also, in Gangs in New York, they used an idea I had where I showed a war on top of a war. You see what I'm saying? Where I showed these various religious groups fighting each other. Well, at the same time, in the background, you had the Gulf War. You see what I'm saying? So it's like that sort of craziness was everywhere in society. So I added mirroring to amplify the sense of fight between these two groups.
I see. All right, on to the next. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You say it's overrated. It's not one of the best sci-fi films ever made. Explain that.
Well, the thing is E.T.'s a much better film. And the thing is in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, in movies like Starman, on the possibility that you would find some benevolent alien and make contact with him, that first off, a scenario like that happening is extremely remote. Second off, it's like that's not the sort of thing that's going to help you to get through your daily life. You see what I'm saying? It's an interesting fantasy idea. But in terms of actually learning how to be a better person in the real world, it's not a very good example of what we can learn from and grow from. Whereas you look at a movie like Seven Samurai, where you have these samurais take pity on these villagers and fight not for time, but just they're fighting for, to protect these villagers from being exterminated. They're fighting for, moral reasons rather than economic reasons. And that's something we can learn from, that you can make a difference in the world. And you can fight, and you can change things. But to me, that's great art. But people were calling Close Encounters of the Third Kind some kind of science fiction masterpiece. But it's really a very lightweight film. Right. I mean, it's well executed, but I'm saying it's really a bubblegum movie.
Right, right. Now, we'll go back to the black hole. Pointless?
Yeah, pointless, worthless, useless. I mean, just a terrible, terrible movie. I mean, the kindest thing I can say about that movie was it had some really nice production values. It had some really strong actors, and it had, it had some, even decent fight scenes in a couple, parts of the movie. But the bad guys were pretty much just completely bad. The heroes, for the most part, were completely good. There was no gray area between the two of them. And, and there were things in the film like robots not liking other robots and wanting to get into fights with each other. When I say that, I was watching that and I was going, wouldn't there be some kind of program inhibitor to keep robots from destroying each other? I would think, you spend a lot of money making these robots. You wouldn't want them killing each other. I was just looking on the face of it. It was just so contrived. It was just so ridiculous. I mean, I guess the kindest thing you could say about it is maybe someone could do an MST 3000 commentary on that, and maybe poke some fun at it. But I thought it was, and the ending was just completely confusing and idiotic, and they didn't know how to end the movie, so they had this whole thing of where the bad guy is inside the robot that was his main henchman at the end, and I was like, yeah, whatever. Terrible film.
You said, now let's go switch to a comic book film.
Spider-Man.
Yeah, we're going to switch to a comic book film now. Spider-Man. You said that was an underrated film and probably one of the best movies based off of a comic strip.
Yeah, absolutely. It may even be the best comic book movie ever made. I mean, it's that good. It really is. I would say, I have, this is an issue I struggle with. Which was better, Superman or Spider-Man? And to me, it might be Spider-Man, at least in terms of the writing of the two films, and the writing and the directing. Both movies are really quite good, but I think if I had to choose between the two, I'd say Spider-Man was the best comic book movie of all time. Superman probably a close second, but the thing was there are real issues in Spider-Man, and I think it's interesting how the Green Goblin in that the writer makes the bad guys into being kind of sad and pathetic, rather than just being completely bad and evil. You kind of feel sorry for these, a lot of the villains in the Spider-Man series, particularly the Green Goblin. And, the whole thing of where he's struggling with the evil, what's bad inside of him and what's good inside of him. It's like you see that inside the villain, where he's struggling back and forth with that issue, whereas a lot of times with the villains, you don't see that. And I thought that was really kind of interesting. I was almost moved to tears at the end of Spider-Man, actually. That was a very moving scene where the Green Goblin gives him that choice. Save the woman you love or save the kids on the school bus. And he tries to save both. And then the Goblin, he's holding on to both of them. And then the Green Goblin, is trying to push both of them, into the river. And the people from the bridge start throwing stuff at the Green Goblin. That was a touching moment. That was a powerful scene, and I didn't see it coming. It's one thing to have a good scene. It's another thing to have a good scene that you don't see coming and works. That's what you really want. And that movie had it. And the whole issue of what's our responsibility, as a citizen, what's our responsibility to the society around us and to other people. And, where Peter Parker's character at the beginning of the story, he's really kind of a self-indulgent, young pup kid. But then he realizes that, he made some mistakes and he's trying to gain some redemption. And, that's a powerful, important message. And to me, it was, at each scene, the whole way it's put together was just so well done by Sam Raimi. The acting, everything. It's like, I watched that movie and people, it's like people ask me, what might I changed in there? And the answer is nothing. One single thing. Good job, guys.
All right, on